It's 8:07, and we've all heard about boundaries, how important it is to set them. But what exactly does that mean? And what are healthy boundaries? How exactly do we set them? Where do we set them? Mental wellness and human behavior expert Dr. Karen Ruskin is here today. We're talking about the boundaries that we need to set quite literally in every single relationship. Dr. Karen, always great to talk with you. Let's first talk about which are perhaps the most important relationships we need to set these boundaries, and in what areas we should set them.
Thank you for asking that, because most people think that boundaries are just for one particular type of relationship, let's say marital. But I will say with certainty, boundaries are across the board, all relationships. The relationship we have with ourselves, marital, dating, parenting, doctor-patient, teacher and coach and students. Across the board, even work, with your work relationships. And as far as what types of boundaries, often people think it's just in terms of touch or space, but in reality, it's spatial boundaries, touch, time is a boundary, how you set your time, verbal boundaries in terms of emotional, there's intellectual boundaries, there's material boundaries, and financial boundaries. All of these are the boundaries that we set or do not set. And it is vital that we set boundaries for ourselves and for others, so that way we can live a healthy, functioning life.
Let's talk about the relationship you have with yourself. What would you say are one or two of the most important boundaries we should be setting for ourselves?
The key is, when we set a boundary, to stick with it. Because often the fear is, if we do not stick with a boundary, let's say, for an example, we decide a friend contacts us, or our spouse wants to do something with us, or there's a work obligation, and then we dismiss a agenda that we had for ourselves, a plan, whether it was to set time to eat, whether it was set time literally to sleep, to exercise, and then we don't adhere to that boundary because we end up doing something that someone else has requested of us. We are now in essence being disrespectful and dishonoring our own boundary for the need of another.
You know, I feel like a lot of people can acknowledge that they are not being respectful to themselves and what their wishes and desires are, and they ultimately end up miserable, you know, and I'll put myself in that same category. But to be honest with you, I'll also put myself in the category that sometimes it's hard for me to say no.
Yes, it's always hard to say no. And what's so interesting is boundaries are not just about saying no. Boundaries are verbalizing what needs are. For example, if someone were to disrespect and dishonor your boundary in terms of an intellectual boundary, so in other words, they ridicule you for something that you believe, an opinion that you have, being able to say, it hurts me when you talk about my viewpoint in a negative way. It hurts me when you dismiss my feelings. That is how you can communicate in such a way that isn't just about saying no, it's communicating a need. And when we don't do that, it's likely, and most often, out of actual fear. Fear of job loss, fear the person won't like us anymore, fear that our friend will think that we're being selfish, fear that the person is going to abandon us. It's fear that often stops us from keeping these boundaries, or let alone even setting them.
Well, let's talk about the control issue as well, because we cannot control what somebody else does, how they react to us.
Yes.
And so we set a boundary, and we can't control how. So then at that point, how do we continue to maintain that line, so to speak?
Okay, so it is imperative. Oh my gosh, you nailed it. It is imperative that we set the boundaries and recognize we cannot own what someone else says or does. Anyone being a boundary violator does not say something about you, it says everything about them. How someone treats you is not about you, it is about them. So, what do? We continue to set our boundaries and adhere to them, even when someone is violating them. Now, painfully, there are some relationships that will end or will decrease in the quantity of which we remain connected with them if they are constantly violating our boundaries, even when we are asserting them. In other cases, and the hope would be, of course, we have this wonderful, healthy relationship where one sets the boundaries and the fears that we have don't come true. Instead, the other person says, oh my gosh, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize that that was so upsetting to you. I didn't realize that I was dishonoring you. And then we can build a relationship because boundaries are not about detaching with someone. Boundaries, often we're setting them because we want to have a relationship with them. We want to build the relationship in a healthy way.
Yeah, and hopefully there's a reparation. Dr. Karen, such a great conversation.
Thank you
so much. Always Always good to talk to you.
Thank you.